Okay. Now, I've invited each panellist to address us for 2 or 3 minutes, saying what they want to say about the wider UK. They're likely to touch, as is this discussion, on the panel discussion this morning. That's fine. They want to reflect on that. And then I may have a couple of questions, but I'm hoping to engage the audience as soon as we possibly can. So I will kick off, Simon, with you, if you don't mind, and then we'll go Kirsty later, and then Paul.
I thought you were going to ask me a question, but I'll answer it. I was fascinated, this is the earlier discussion, coming from London, I come as a foreigner, very careful how I claim a license or no license on these topics. But I'm very much a Poltermite, I have to say. I mean, I do think this has been grossly overplayed as a great national crisis. The pace at which politics moves on from a crisis, as we want to describe that, is always underrated. I just somehow feel in 2 or 3 months' time, whatever happens next week, we'll go on to something else. Essentially, particularly to London, anything to do with the provinces, the nations, local government is boring. For the moment, Scotland is brilliantly enlivened, but it will pass. I think Devo Supermax, as I call it, an independent light, as you can also call it, will end up being much the same. There will be a huge getting together, there may be a second referendum, whatever it is, there will be an arrangement. All the things that Project Fear said wouldn't happen will happen. A lot of things that the SFP said promised won't happen. There will be a tremendous convergence of two people who one of them has had enough of the other. But essentially, there's too much in common there to be a breach. So I think that's not really a big thing. The question, which also came up earlier on, is there anything new here at all, such that Wales, or for that matter, England cities might grab at? I really do think that the shock that's been delivered to London, and I see this through London's eyes, London is so detached from this debate, you cannot exaggerate it. You wouldn't get a room like this going in London, you just wouldn't at the moment. But I do think they've had a terrible shock. And the shock is essentially the centralist syndrome shock. And I do think there's an opportunity. And I think the opportunity is, in some sense, to refashion localism within the United Kingdom. Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, you can kind of see it. England, you just can't. Regionalism is out. There's absolutely no sense of regional identity in England. The question is what you do with local government. And the only thing you can do with local government, and it's perfectly doable, is simply decentralise a certain amount of taxation and power. And I just think we should and we might even go back to the pre-83 settlement to allow local taxes to rise in accordance with local wishes, to decentralise taxation, to decentralise some other revenue streams, and to decentralise some powers. And I think that really might happen. As far as Wales is concerned, I think the real problem is nobody knows what Wales really wants. In Scotland, you knew the end game of Scotland's independence. You either get it or you don't. In Wales, I get no sense of there being an end game. I really don't know what it is that's wanted. I heard Carol on the radio the other day sounding unbelievably hesitant. And I just thought, well, what does he want? I mean, even Leanne this morning, I wasn't quite sure where she was going. And I think the real opportunity for Wales, this is my last point, is you want a convention, have a convention. Stop waiting for someone to give you a convention. What's the matter with you? Have a convention. Decide what it is you want to do, and then present it to London, and just at this particular moment in time, you just might get it.
Kirsty.
Well, I'm not quite so relaxed that in 3 months' time we'll look back on all of this and we'll wonder what the whole fuss is about. And I feel anxious about it because I am worried about what will happen to Wales in this process post the outcome of the referendum. I'm not worried about the Scots, and I'm sure there will be discussions and they will become an amicable way forward north of the border. But my concern is, what is Wales's place in that, and how do we get Wales's voice heard in that? Because I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I bear the scars on my back. I know how difficult it is to get Welsh voices heard in Westminster. And actually, sometimes, for most of the time, it's not the politicians in Westminster that you've got to worry about. You've got to worry about Whitehall. That's the people that you've got to convince in all of this. And that has been, I think, incredibly difficult, regardless of who is trying to have those negotiations. So I'm less relaxed about that. But I do absolutely agree that the challenge is for Wales being absolutely clear about what devolution looks like for Wales. And we are at our best and we are at our most successful as a nation in securing those powers when we can build on a consensus. And that does mean sometimes that political parties have to compromise. You know, we had to compromise when we had the first referendum. People have had to compromise in the second. But we are at our best when we can find a way of coalescing together and speaking with one voice. There was incredible incredulity on behalf of Westminster about the setting up of the Silk Commission. I remember having a very frank conversation when people said, you know, forget it, people in Wales aren't interested, nobody can agree. But actually, you know, getting the three-party leaders and the interim party leader into a room, we were able to you know, thrash that out. And I think actually we don't necessarily need a convention in the sense of deciding where we want to go in Wales, because I think we haven't got time for that. It's too critical, it's too time critical, and I think we have to work on what we have got, and that is, Rob says it's out of fashion and it's yesterday's way of doing things, but I think the Silk Commission, part 1 and part 2, is the basis of that. I don't think we need to have another commission. We need to grasp the opportunity of the work that has already been done. There is a generally broad consensus around that. People will have to, individual party leaders and parties will have to look to themselves and study and compromise once again, like we always have. But I think that is what we can coalesce and work forward. What is not the way to do it is, unfortunately, and I know that he's sincere about having extra powers for Wales, but demanding that we're offered the same in one voice, but then turning around and saying, but actually, no, we don't want it, is not a credible way to negotiate with Whitehall or the politicians in Whitehall. We have to stand up with one voice, and I would suggest at this stage, the best that we've got is Silk 2, and that is the blueprint of where we could be working from and what we could be demanding of Westminster. But I do agree, now is the time to do it. We have to do it, otherwise we'll be left behind.
I was only joking about the Silk Commission to get my cheap crack about fag packets in, so just, I don't know people from the press here, okay? But right, Leighton, but in the interest of balance, I omitted to say, just in case anyone's in any doubt, that Leighton Andrews is the Labour AM for Rhondda.
Okay. You have to understand that I prepared my remarks as a backbencher. I now represent a government, so I may be a lot more boring. I think that I'm going to say rough 6 or 7 things. If we want a United Kingdom to exist, we need a new union based on popular sovereignty and a new political culture to sustain it. And the London-based media needs to learn to nurture and sustain that new union. And we need a radical reform of Westminster political institutions to underpin that. Am I optimistic that that can happen? No, but I think it's worth arguing for. Popular sovereignty. The new union needs to be one in which the constituent parts have consciously entered. The philosophy of Westminster sovereignty is finished, as Gordon Brown has said in his book. We know that in respect of Wales, of course, because the Supreme Court has demonstrated that on a number of judgments, siding with Wales rather than the UK government. The First Minister is right to call for a UK constitutional convention. I think there should have been a constitutional convention before the referendum on independence in Scotland was agreed, but it didn't happen, and I think we are heading to a looser union. I'm not so bothered about the size of the House of Commons, which is more or less on a par with the Assemblée Nationale and the Bundestag. But the House of Lords, 850 members, is a constitutional monstrosity. It needs to be scrapped and replaced with a smaller democratic body representative of the nations and regions of the UK. Also, Westminster, UK cabinet ministers need to understand when they are genuinely UK ministers, like the Foreign and Defence Secretaries, or whether they are ministers who have to deliver UK or Great British responsibilities in cooperation with devolved administrations, like the Department for Work and Pensions, or largely English ministers like education and health. And that takes me to England. England needs some kind of democratic space, as my colleagues John Denham and John Cruddas have said. And I think the chaos on the political right at the moment, with the defection to UKIP, the by-election on October the 9th, on David Cameron's birthday, those things are demonstrating that there is a new debate going on in England. Simon is absolutely right, of course, to talk about what you do in terms of a democratic space. Is it around local government? It's a debate for the English to have. A philosophy of English exceptionalism is no basis on which to hold together a political union. And the London-based media has been wholly complicit in that philosophy. I read a lot of sanctimonious editorials on Monday in the London newspapers following the first opinion poll showing a possible vote in favour of independence. They were sanctimonious about Westminster politicians. Okay, Westminster politicians, I think, have to a large extent ignored devolution over 15 years, many of them. But those London newspapers certainly have. They have steadfastly ignored devolution for the previous 15 years, noticing devolution only when we have used our powers to do things they don't like. For example, protecting Welsh students against higher tuition fees, which was denounced, of course, as educational apartheid in a number of newspapers. So the London media needs to learn, though I doubt, I'm afraid, that the Telegraph, Mail, Times or Sun will do so, that being advocates for a chunk of the disgruntled English is not likely to nurture pride in a new union. So, to summarise, Constitutional Convention needed to create a new union based on popular sovereignty and a written constitution, a reform of Westminster institutions, including a replacement of the House of Lords, some kind of space for England, a new culture of openness, recognising diversity and difference within a looser union, an end to the metropolitan provincialism of the Westminster political media complex. All of those things I'd like to see. I'm not necessarily optimistic that they will happen.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Rob. Well, Lee said earlier on that he'd tried to find a Conservative speak, and he'd tried 7 people, and then eventually came to me, I'm afraid. So I don't know whether I'm supposed to speak on behalf of a party that embraces everybody from David Melding to Liam Fox. I'm not going to try to do that. But I'm the ersatz Conservative here today. I think that one of the things I would say in praise of the Prime Minister is the maturity in holding the referendum. The willingness to hold a referendum, I think, was something which could be emulated by many other countries. If I wasn't originally going to be here, I was going to be in Georgia this week. Georgia and its relations with Russia, gosh, they have something to emulate from the way in which Scotland has a relation with the rest of the UK. As everybody said earlier on, I think the engagement, the level of engagement that there has been in Scotland is something which is quite an example to us all of how politics could become more engaged. Now, is that going to result in a more plebiscitary politics in the future? Are people going to want to have a greater say in the way in which things are done rather than leaving it to elected politicians? I've thought for a long time that the death of representational politics is around the corner. And I just wonder whether the referendum in Scotland is another step towards that death of representational politics. Answering the question about what this means to the rest of the UK, what about yes? I think that yes, and it would really be yes by a narrow majority, yes would mean a reopening, as somebody said earlier on, of some of the questions that we perhaps avoided before we started asking whether there should be a referendum. I think some of the issues about whether enough people were voted yes will be reopened, and I don't think that the British state will simply relax and allow Scotland to go. I think there'll be an extremely complex process to follow. If you look at what the Constitution Committee of the House of Lords has said, a committee chaired by Ian Lang, who of course was a former Secretary of State for Scotland, has written a letter a couple of weeks ago to the Times, talked about letters to the Times. Ian Lang, Michael Forsyth and Malcolm Rifkin wrote a letter saying this is an incredibly complicated process. I think that legislation which would follow a yes vote will take a very long time. If you look at that Constitution Committee's report, they say in that nothing should be hurried. And as Kirsty has said, the resistance that there will be among Whitehall officials, we saw that when we did our commission work, will be in spades to a freedom, do I mean freedom, a bill which enables Scotland to be independent. How will the rest of the United Kingdom function? Well, it can't function with just Wales and England. Northern Ireland, I think, would there be a real existential problem for the Unionist side in Northern Ireland, and the Nationalist side in Northern Ireland will see the possibility of the reunification of Ireland. great problems, I think, in Northern Ireland, if there's a yes vote. Leaving Wales and England as a unit, Trinidad and Tobago, Tanzania, the only countries I can think of where there are two unequal partners. So I think there's a grave problem for England and Wales left as a polity in the future. And I think one of the possibilities that might come out of that, I think there is a possibility of a greater desire for independence in Wales, but there's also a possibility, I think, for a greater desire of assimilation with England. Yeah. So there could be a less powerful Wales following a yes vote, as well as a more powerful Wales. Devo Max, the no vote, Devo Max, what's the English view of that? We heard somebody's alluded already to what John Redwood was saying. What is going to be the English view of Devo Max? We're told that everything will be done and dusted by St. Andrew's Day or Burns Night or whatever it is. I doubt that. I think there will be a lot of English MPs who will not want to see that happen. It can't happen without due process. And if it does happen without due process, my goodness, what does that open up about the questions about the sort of process that we in our commission set up for some of the things that we were proposing should be done in Wales. The English Parliament, well, there was a report by a friend of mine, another former clerk in the House of Commons, Bill Mackay, about English votes inside the House of Commons. That rather has passed people by, but it was a very good report, and I think if that is implemented, we could see the Parliament, the House of Commons we presently have, and I would go further than Leighton about the House of Lords, I'd abolish it and have a unicameral Parliament, but the House of Commons could work very well under the Mackay proposals with English members being responsible for matters that affect England only. One thing I do see as a possibility in the House of Commons after a no vote is a backlash in Scotland, and don't forget 53 of the directly elected members of the Scottish Parliament are members of the SNP. Could we see 53 directly elected members of the House of Commons from the SNP following a yes vote? And could the SNP be holding the balance of power inside the House of Commons after the general election next year?
In the event of a narrow no vote, it seems to me that, as somebody said from the floor this morning, that the West Lothian question is put particularly acutely then, and in my view, it's unlikely that English representatives will put up with that anymore. That may in turn place particular pressure on any future Labour government or Lib Lab government, given Scottish representation. But let's set the politics that just aside for a moment, the party politics. But isn't it the case that it's difficult for the British establishment to sort of think, buy the Scots off with the Danegeld and then think, oh, we can carry on, because the English genie will be out of the bottle there? Simon, I think you've written on that recently.
I mean, I agree. I do. To be honest, we don't know what we're talking about. This is new territory. Yep. It really is. I mean, I said before, I think it won't change much. I think most ordinary people in Britain, in England and probably in Scotland and Wales won't notice an awful lot different in 3 months or 6 months' time. I do think the political community will notice things are different in precisely the terms you say. One of the curiosities about Devo Max is everybody presents it as some panacea of pain-free devolution. It's bloody painful, because all the cats are out of the bag. In the first place, you've got the problem with the subvention, never discussed, either in Scotland or in Wales, whenever these problems come up. Somehow the assumption is the money's going to go on gushing. That's going to stop. If there's one thing that the English MPs are going to be absolutely insistent upon, is that sort of thing stops. If you think you want powers, you don't get the money. And it's going to be an absolute... I mean, the East Anglian question is either here or there compared to that. The Treasury is sitting there waiting to pounce. And I think that's the most important thing to realise. And you see it definitely in Carwyn's nervousness on what, give me the powers, but I may not take them. Why not? You know jolly well what happens if you take income tax powers. There's going to be a different sort of lockstep. They'll just top slice your subvention. So I think a lot of this has to be seen in realistic terms. I mean, the SNP have been very careful. They banned all their yes campaigners from ever saying anything negative about independence. The morning after the night before is going to be very painful. And I do think at some point that's going to come home.
Leighton, you mentioned some of the, I think, very interesting work by John Cruddas within your own party, and it is very interesting, but I may be wrong, and I'm happy for you to correct me, but I don't see any great sign that that thinking is having any significant traction on the UK leadership of the Labour Party, and it seems to me that it needs to have, if somebody said this morning, social democracy has got some kind of chance in a United Kingdom or rest of UK, but it needs to avoid this West Lothian question being posed at its most critical, doesn't it?
Well, I think I'd say watch this space. I think that there has been a shock to the Westminster political leaderships over the last few days, and I think you've seen that in what happened yesterday. One of the things I disagree with Paul about is I don't think Cameron was skillful in respect of granting the referendum, because there could have been three choices. There could have been Deva Max, and that referendum was agreed between the government of the UK and Scotland without any reference to anybody else, clearly without any thinking through of what the implications might be. It was clearly an assumption that Scotland was going to vote no, and that was, I think, a very extraordinary and incompetent decision. As for the West Lothian question, I honestly think that at the moment, I respect and accept a lot of what Simon has just said about the reaction in England, but I actually think that the crisis on the political right is acute. The UKIP split, the Conservative Party doesn't know where it is or what it wants. It is clearly going to be, it looks like very much like it's going to be a UKIP by-election victory in October. So we're not just looking at next week's vote in Scotland, we need to look on into October. What does that then mean into the run-up to a UK general election? And I take Paul, what I do agree with Paul, is that if it's a close no, even if the SNP doesn't do well at a UK general election, there is a very strong likelihood they will do very well at the subsequent Scottish parliamentary election in 2016. And are we then in never-ending territory, where we just have a repeated referendum until things change? I think we are in a period where we don't really know what the outcomes are likely to be. I do think the only way to work your way through that is to decide that you want, on the assumption that there will be a no vote next week, a new union and a recasting of those institutions.
Okay, but let's talk about this convention idea, which one or two poured cold water on this morning, but let's keep the hair running. Kirsty Williams called for some consensus. You've already got it, because you both want a constitutional convention at UK level of some kind, and both of you, in different ways, I think, are talking about some kind of federal settlement, ultimately, as sort of the desired end game. But isn't any convention, it's also a question about who's on it, are they elected, and is it just the great and the good again, or whatever. But isn't it stymied now from the start, because the Danegeld promise has already been made?
Well,
The Scots keep the Barnett money. They have full fiscal autonomy as well. They have everything bar foreign affairs. They've got welfare, they've got the lot. So any convention which wants to unpick that and alter that is skewered, frankly, isn't it, Kirsty?
But don't believe it. Don't believe it. The English government will have you on that one. They really will. Jerry agrees. There's no way you get Devo Max and keep the Barnett formula present rate.
Well, we could talk about Scottish backlashes then, but Kirsty, you can almost speak for the UK government, I think, so let's see what you got to say about that.
My life would have been a lot easier over the last couple of years if I could do that completely, believe me. I think the choices are, you either end up with a bilateral communication convention style, if there's a no vote, then you have ongoing discussions between Scotland and the UK government, and you arrive in those situations that Leighton just described, decisions between the two that excludes the need to address the aspirations of the Welsh people and Northern Ireland, and indeed the England, and I think we cannot get away from the challenges that this is going to arise, and that's why I think you have to have it on a UK level, because I just don't think the English are going to sit back and just accept that the money will keep flowing, or the power will keep flowing. Scottish MPs will continue to vote on English matters. I just don't think that is going to happen, and therefore it has to be I think on a UK basis, yes, my end goal would be a federal arrangement underpinned by a written constitution that states quite clearly the role of the centre as opposed to the power lying in the nation of Wales, and addresses the issue of what happens within England. I think what will happen at the general election, actually, if there is a no vote, that Alex Salmond's pitch to the Scottish people will be, you have to send SNP members of Parliament down there to keep these people honest, to make sure that they do everything that they said they were going to do. So I think actually that's what some people I know, we've had discussions, whether it be about extra powers or Barnett, well, we've just got to get the other side of the referendum. It was quite clear to me it was never just about getting to the other side of the referendum, because the pitch from Salmond was always going to be, now you have to, you know, we have to follow through on this and send a load of SNP members of Parliament down to Scotland. So the problems aren't going to go away, certainly, if there's a no vote. And even if it's a bigger no vote than perhaps all the polls are suggesting, because Salmond's next pitch will be about the general election. So I think that's what will happen to keep them honest. And I just think out of those two options, a bilateral negotiation between Westminster and Scotland or an all-UK People's Convention, or whether it be the Irish model or another way of doing it, I think is a preferable option for Wales. But in sending people to that, in arguing the case for Wales, we need to be clear about what we're arguing for. And that, I think, is the fundamental problem that we've got at the moment in Wales, is that there is no clear voice about what the outcomes for Wales look like. And I think that is the greatest danger that we face at the moment. And I would again say the best hope that we've got is a coalescence behind the work that has been done. And I'm not just saying this to flatter him, and he is a constituent. but all right, I am just saying it to flatter him, and he's a constituent. But Silk 2 proposals is what we've got, and there was cross-party representation on that. And I think that's the best hope that we've got, is coalescing behind that. And it's not just about asking for more money or asking for the easy stuff that Jerry talked about. It is embracing that in its full. It is about doing the hard stuff in Wales as well. And if we don't, I think Paul is right, we will polarise. There will be a growth of demand for independence in Wales, but also all those no campaigners will look to push us back and look to see powers given back to Westminster. And that's why, for progressives, like Leighton and me, we've got to agree on the way forward for greater devolution.
Well, it appears you are agreeing in a convention, but I want to push away at this with Leighton now. That hasn't Gordon Brown sold the past? Because the promises have been made now, which personally I think is very difficult for any party at UK level to roll back from, given the electoral threat of the SNP, even in the event of a close no vote. But if I understand things correctly, Gordon Brown's also promised a convention just for the Scots, hasn't he? So how are we going to pull off a convention at UK level, which the Westminster establishment is really... Because effectively, it's almost an invitation for the establishment to abolish itself, and there is absolutely no historical track record of that happening in the UK.
Well, that's about 3 or 4 different questions. I mean,
Answer them all.
Let's just start with... Look, Gordon Brown is playing a really important role, I think, in the Scottish referendum campaign. I think he's helped to swing to a degree the focus of some of the debate. I happen to think that we need to see where Scotland is in 8 days' time, and we need to see what has come out of that. The implication, there will have to be a series of discussions around what Devo Max looks like. I still don't quite know what Devo Max is, actually, because lots of people have different views on what Devo Max is. But there will have to be a series of conversations around that. I think there has to be some kind of rational space within which we discuss these issues. Do we want a new union? Do the English actually want us? I'd like to know that. I don't know sometimes at the moment. There are clearly some elements who don't. But there is, if people value the union overall in these islands, and we'll have a better view on that in 8 days' time, then there needs to be a discussion about what the union looks like going forward. And I don't think that you can kind of isolate specific questions around, even Silk 2 at the moment, let me say, and I know what the government position is, and I absolutely and thoroughly endorse the Welsh Government's position on Silk 2 today. And
I give you a couple of weeks.
Yeah. But I can't even tell whether Kirsty will have any MPs in Wales at the next general election, or whether she'll have any assembly members at the following assembly election. given the rise of UKIP at the present time in the polls. I don't know what the political space is going to be within which we're going to be negotiating.
Okay, well, I want to talk about the implications for leadership about that in a minute, but I just want to bring Simon and Paul in here. So, Simon, you have greater expertise than many of us on the prospects of regionalism or city regionalism and so on in England. But let's say there's a now or no vote, the Scots get neo-fiscal, full fiscal autonomy. Is there a threat to Wales there, and indeed elsewhere in the UK, if, say, London says, oh, we'll have that. That sounds quite nice. We'll keep all our taxes. I really fancy that. Or East Anglia or Kent. Is there another genie possibly coming out of the bottle there?
I don't know. I did do prediction. This whole meeting is about prediction. Very vanity. I simply think that a genie has come out of the bottle. I don't think in England anyone has had any idea what to do with the genie. He's running around Boris's mind, other curious places. And he's going to give you the power. So he wants to get hands on stamp duty, which is a vast amount of money in London. I first ever job was serving on the Rate of Water Commission many years ago when we did City Regions. City Regions have been around for most of my life. They never got anywhere. They were introduced with Selkirk and Merseyside and all these rivers, they were called. And it didn't really work. There was no sense of identity, there was no sense of accountability. When John Prescott tried to go to the North East Region again, he was thrown out of hand because he was going to abolish the counties. People don't think that way in England. They simply think of their town or their city, or they think of their county. Those are the two institutions they recognise and respect. And the old model of counties and county boroughs worked. They should never have been abolished in my view. And the crucial thing about it are local property taxes. And those local property taxes worked. And I still think if we went back to that, you'd solve a lot of these problems. The problem I think for Wales is that if Scotland is given serious power under DVM Max, and for some reason or other, the Treasury continues its generosity for a time, Wales, the expectation is going to be, Wales, what are you going to have now? And I think if Wales then says, well, we're not really sure about this after all, I don't know, I mean, it's going to look very, very odd. I don't know what the general view of the English is going to be, or for that matter, view of the Welsh is going to be. But you've clearly got this terror of fiscal sovereignty being reverted in any sense all across the border. And I just think Wales has simply got to make decisions what it wants. If you continue not to say what you want, as Jerry says, you won't get it.
Paul, I think it's fair to say that on the Silk Commission, that we recommended the devolution of stamp duty, but kind of hoped that London would never get stamp duty on its own, didn't we? I mean, that's probably the truth of it.
You're right, Robert, that we had a visit, I don't know if you were there, from the Greater London Authority, Greater London Assembly, I mean, who said to us, well, this is a very good idea about devolving stamp duty land tax. We want it too. And I was not able to say any cogent reason why London should not have it if Wales would have it, other than you've got a hell of a lot more stamp duty land tax to claim in London than we have in Wales. I agree with what Simon said about the way local government has been depowered in England. And going back to what Cynnog Davies said earlier on, if city regions in England, how do they work for places like Herefordshire or Shropshire? They really don't. But in Herefordshire, people have a very strong sense of identity with Herefordshire and would like to see Herefordshire empowered. That they don't want to see that power going to Birmingham and them being some sort of adjunct of Birmingham. Can I just go back to the issue of the convention? I've been reading James Mitchell's book about the Scottish question, and what has struck me is how many conventions there have been in Scotland through the end of the 19th and through the 20th century. I'd forgotten and never knew that there had been so many. And it's so easy for these things to be set up after a cataclysmic event, after Home Rule all around. There was a speakers' conference which petered out, came to nothing. And it is possible, I think, that will be what will happen after a no vote. There will be a convention set up once again, and nothing very much will happen because of the, as Kirsty said, the innate conservatism which Whitehall always shows on these things.
Final question. Oh, go on.
One, I think I can remember that something from the Mitchell book, actually, Stafford Cripps had said that he wanted to see all the responsibility passing to a Secretary of State for Scotland, but no power passing to a Secretary of State for Scotland. And I think that sentiment is still alive in Whitehall.
Final question from me before opening it up. Whatever one's... Jerry Holton said this morning that he'd like to see people tend their own garden, as it was quoting Voltaire, I think. But it seems to me that part of tending the Welsh garden, politically now, is being mindful of the dangers and the opportunities in this very fluid situation external to Wales. And whatever one thinks of political developments in Scotland in the last 15 years or so on, I think one can't deny that the national movement, if I can use that term, has been brilliantly led. You know, they've come from an absolute marginal political force to coming close to decoupling from the state. What I'd like to ask each panellist, in a very brief answer, is, well, what does leadership mean in Wales now? What kind of leadership should we be, what should leaders be doing in Wales in these circumstances? What should it look like right now?
Well, I think it has to be prudent until we've seen the outcome from Scotland, firstly. But I think it also has to be fixed not only on the question of what powers we might want for Wales, but how does the constitutional settlement across the UK look on a coherent basis. It's not just a question about having the debate about Wales in the abstract, it seems to me. And I think that means an engagement across borders, within parties, and it needs to go as far as it possibly can, as Laura was saying about Scotland earlier, beyond the established political parties.
Kirsty.
I think it needs to be competent, and I think it needs to be bold, and I think it needs to, I would agree with Leighton, it needs to be outgoing and looking to reach out and coalescing people with a view of what Wales wants, and then being able to use that to back up their position in negotiations with Whitehall and Westminster. But it's got to be proven to be competent, consistent, but at this stage I think you need to be bold too.
Paul.
Inspiring and visionary, I suppose, is what I would say leadership has to be. Leaders have to have followers, and people don't follow people who are not visionary and inspiring. And I'm not sure we have that quality of leaders in Wales.
Simon.
There are no adjectives left. It'll be very good. I mean, the question I was asking, would Scotland be where it is now without Alexander? And I just don't know the answer. But he's clearly very important. I mean, he came down to London, he addressed the Guardian, the place almost stood up and roared. A bit like Boris Johnson. I mean, some of these people have a way of capturing a public mood that very few other people have. Now, the only sensible question I have to ask in Wales' case is what do you want this person to do? I mean, do you want an Alex Salmond to run wild? I think you probably don't, for the reasons given. I think you do want a degree of caution. I have to say, I mean, it would be quite nice to have an Alex Salmond of sorts coming out of Wales, and not just somebody who goes up to London and works there. But above all, the thing that Salmond had, he had a very clear idea of what he wanted. He wanted independent Scotland, all right? I just don't know what anyone wants in Wales, and that's not been sorted out yet.
Okay, who's going to be first? You've had your say for. I'll see if I can do it later on. There's a gentleman near the window. If you could just say who you are as well. And I'm looking for short, snappy questions, not speeches, please.
Yeah, my name's David Klebb. I'm Director of Renewable UK in Wales. And something a bit more prosaic. We have targets for renewable energy in the UK, European targets for 2020. And of course, Scotland is flying away with its renewable energy. And it's on that basis that we're just about on track to meet our targets in 2020. But I suspect that renewable energy isn't the only sector where, if Scotland secedes from the UK, we're going to be vastly underperforming as what's left of the UK. I'm just wondering what the panel think is the resilience and the forethinking of Whitehall and the politicians in actually coming to grips with the magnitude of what the rest of the UK is going to have to achieve in order to meet its legal obligations.
Okay, thanks. I'll take two or three in a row. The gentleman in front of you.
Robert Bryn-Jones, IWA member. There was a comment made in an IWA blog which basically said that whether this is yes or no, what will be revealed is the lack of political leverage we have in Wales. John Owen's already referred to the lack of financial clout we have. So it's difficult to see, in all honesty, where the leverage is going to come from vis-à-vis Wales. A solution to it would be a Wales Constitutional Convention, which would be along the Scottish model, which is inclusive not just of politicians but civil society. And I think that would give the politicians a basis for genuinely being able to negotiate with Westminster rather than just on their party political basis. But as in Scotland, that would involve the Labour Party in Wales taking a hegemonic view of their power and an inclusive view of their power. And whilst I may not doubt Cameron Jones's desire to do that, I'm not sure his party are willing to go with him on that. The second point I'd make is regarding UKIP. I think that if there were an English Parliament tomorrow, UKIP would fade. I think it's just UKIP is basically the voice of England that doesn't have a voice at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks. Convention's coming out of our ears, haven't we, today? But is there one more? I'll ask the panel. So quickly, don't forget the question about the environmental targets. But Wales, new convention, Leighton?
Well, I mean, let's be clear, on renewable energy, Scotland is doing very well with Westminster subsidies. That's the reality. And they would be lost if there was a yes vote next week. In terms of the need I'm not convinced that Wales doesn't have clout, actually. We have demonstrated our ability to make decisions that have been different from decisions taken at Westminster in a number of areas. I think we do have the clout that we need, but we do need to have clarity, but we need to have that clarity within the context of knowing where we are after next week's vote and knowing where we are in respect of agreements across parties, as to where the union is going. Simon could well be right, Jerry could well be right, that in 2 to 3 months, all of the kind of energy that has bubbled up in the last few days will have been dissipated and things will have moved on. I think that would be a shame. I think there is a moment of opportunity here that I hope will lead to deeper and more sophisticated proposals in respect of the future of the UK as a union, which parties put in their manifestos next time at a UK general election level. On UKIP, I think it's quite tempting sometimes to say, well, UKIP is just the voice of English disaffection. But let's remember, they've had an MEP in Wales since 2009, and they've got an MEP in Scotland now. They are, I think, there is a huge amount of very good work on the radical right that's being done, which demonstrates, by the way, that my own constituency is the most UKIP-friendly, arguably, in the whole of Wales, certainly within the Labour Party. On the votes in May, our Labour vote went up in Rhondda Cynon Taf. UKIP's vote went up, Plaid Cymru's vote went down. Now, there is a disaffection out there which UKIP has captured, and they've not just captured it in England. I think it reflects the different stages of the constitutional debates in Scotland and Wales. The reality of this week has demonstrated the nervousness about the possible loss of the union. Extraordinary headline did people see in the Telegraph at the beginning of the week about the Queen must intervene, as though that was going to kind of resolve everything. But the reality is that I think the UK political establishment is shaken, has been shaken earlier this week. It may be it's flowing away now, but it has been shaken. And I genuinely think that where Scotland is with its constitutional arrangements is a great concern, and that gives a degree of advantage to them in respect of the funding issues.
Well, okay. I think I know who I'd back. The battle between Scottish Labour and Welsh Labour. But Kirsty, Scottish Lib Dems versus Welsh Lib Dems. No contest, is it?
I think Leighton is underplaying the difficulties that we have, and if he was being upfront and honest, he would acknowledge that. And you don't need to take something as controversial as Barnet as an example. Let's go back to renewable energy. There has been a growing consensus in Wales over the years since the establishment of the Assembly in 1999 about powers over renewable energy and consents. You know, and the previous Labour government in Westminster was not convinced about that argument, despite the fact that Wales was putting that argument to them. You know, we haven't been able to convince the coalition government of that particular subject either. And so Leighton says, oh, well, we've made decisions, we showed things, we can do things differently. That's not the same as leverage. Of course, we can do things differently with the powers that we've got. But it has been a battle royal every time to be able to lever anything else out of Whitehall. And I think that's the honest answer to that. And I think the ongoing issue around Barnet is another example of that. And that is why Jerry has always been the challenge Jerry's always given to me. And I've always said it in the chamber, and Leighton has agreed with me in the chamber. In the end, you don't need Welsh people saying you need to reform Barnet. You need the MPs in the North East and the North West and the South West also jumping up and down, demanding the change of the Barnet formula to even up that answer. And I think if Leighton was being completely candid, he would acknowledge that.
Of England, presumably. You mean,
Yes, yeah.
Okay, right, we're going to go, yes. Who are you?
In defence of a cautious approach rather than the bold, dynamic leadership that some people are calling for. Those of you who play cards now and again, play bridge, if you've got a really good hand, you go out there and you play your hand aggressively. If you've got a really poor hand, the sensible thing to do is to be very, very cautious and watch what other people are playing. Now, I think Carwyn is being a good card player. And I think that the calls for other much more bold responses and consensus and will take on is not realistic. But if you don't, but some parties may find it advantageous to pretend otherwise if they have no prospect of being in power.
I'll take that as an observation. One could say part of the game is to try and secure a better hand, isn't it? Who's next? Must be somebody else. Yes, you must say who you are.
Geraint Talman Davis, IWA. Can I ask Simon, I mean, you've made the case for localism and for local government in England. What is your view of the recognition of England as an entity within the Union? Which way should that go?
I thought you were going to say local government in Wales, which was interesting. I mean, one of the reasons why
it's on the back of an envelope here.
I was sceptical. I'm sceptical about devolving that to Wales. I mean, just a small country. Much more important, it's sort of three bits of country, each of which relates in some sense to bits of England. Yeah. The integration between the Welsh political economy and England is so great. It's quite unlike Scotland. And I think somehow or other, you just need to think clearly these things through. The assumption that everything to do with devolution from London is to do with Cardiff is I just think wrong. And there's so much ground to be covered. Forget the convention. But what sort of tax freedom do you want? Do you want tax freedom for Gwynedd or for the whole of Wales? Because it affects your relationship with Liverpool, Birmingham, Bristol. And all these things matter.
If only we had the Minister for Local Government with us. Well, no then, come on.
Well, we didn't get an answer on the English question, did we? But
recognition of England as an entity.
The only entity in England, other than Britain, is England. And I might just whip John Redwood there. I mean, that's the single thing that's most likely to come out of this great crisis is a recognition of England.
Some of us, Leighton, myself, Lee Watt, a number of other people in this room, 2 or 3 years ago, campaigned hard on the line that laws which only apply to Wales should only be made in Wales. And it's indefensible not to carry that argument over into England, it seems to me. It's absolutely indefensible.
London is not really an issue. London is a city-state. People who live in London honestly don't know England exists. They think it's London. And the rest of England is there to serve London. And the reason why you've got some crisis with Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland is they're puzzling. And they've suddenly forced themselves onto the agenda. The rest of England just hasn't.
Are you passing on it, Minister? Or are you...
I think there are real issues that about, I think it's a very difficult time to be anybody in local government at the moment. I mean, I genuinely think it is a hard time to be a councillor. And I think that what we have got to do as we move forward on any reform of local government in Wales, we've got to reinvigorate an understanding of why we want people to stand for local councils. And that, Simon's points about the powers that are available to local government are part of that. I think there is a question, to my mind, as to whether we need 200 full-time local politicians in local government, which is what we actually have with the cabinet system at the present time. You know, I think you can make a case that says that local government may have been more invigorated when there was a real role for backbench councillors, who now feel that they don't have that meaningful a role. So alongside the big kind of structural questions, then I think there are issues about how we empower councillors. Having said all that, look, we had a system, Simon was talking about what worked in England in terms of the county boroughs and boroughs. What we had in Wales until the mid-90s was 8 county councils, and I can't remember how many district councils it was. We then went to a system of 22 unitary councils. So from 8 directors of education to 22 directors of education, from 8 directors of social service to 22. Was that a sensible reform of local government? I suspect not. I don't think anybody sensible would have done it. John Redwood did.
Okay. We've gone off piece, which is my fault, not the panel. Kirsty, very quickly.
But I think it is a question that we also need to grapple with in Wales, that for devolution you cannot just mean that's power to Cardiff. One of the most effective tactics I ever employed against a Conservative opponent in an election was when they wanted to hand over running of our local health services to Cardiff. And that sent a shock of horror through the room in both Wales, because whatever Powys LHB was doing to cock up, at least it was Powys people cocking up on behalf of our Powys people. And the prospect of Cardiff of all places, making decisions about Powys local health services was an anathema to the people who I represent. And where I would disagree with Leighton, the whole debate about local government in Wales has been focused on structures, not on the functions. We have to be clear about what we want local government to do. Once we're clear about that, that's when you can draw the lines on the map. Drawing the lines on the map first is not the way to empower local government and make people want to stand for it.
We risk confirming all Simon's prejudices about Welsh people only been interested in their local patch. But Paul, quickly.
I was just going to say, in response to Geraint's question, that I think Frank Field has recommended that the English Parliament should be based in the north.
Yes.
And I think that would be a very, very sound thing to be done if there were such a thing as an English Parliament that is based away from London, taking away this London-centric politics.
Thank you. At this morning's panel, Lee was very cheeky at the end and asked people how they thought the vote would go next week. I'm going to do the same. So, Paul, what's going to happen?
No idea.
Thank you. Kirsty.
Too close to call.
Simon.
50-50.
I think no will be in the majority.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.